China is wrapping up an unprecedented round of talks that geopolitical analysts are calling the axis of upheaval. Russian President Vladimir Putin, North Korean leader Kim Jong Un, and Chinese Premier Xi Jinping they joined them for a massive military parade that took place Wednesday morning in Beijing. The event comes after China hosted the leaders of more than 20 countries, including China and Iran, promoting deeper economic and security ties. There's some footage of it there from this morning. For implications on these talks, we're joined this morning from Cobourg, Ontario by retired Major General Scott Clancy, former NORAD Director of Operations. Good morning.
Morning.
So today is the first time that these three leaders have held a public event together. It was quite a photo op. What did it say to you?
Well, it's sending a clear message to the West that there's the emergence of a counterpole to the hegemony of the West, of the unipolar moment of the United States and especially Western powers is over. And it's also sending a message to the global South that there's an alternative to the hegemony of Western economic and military might in the world.
This military parade is something that we have seen before, but what is the significance of having that show of force with those leaders present?
Well, I think that the show of force with those leaders present, that's trying to send the message. And you saw the reaction of President Trump, who called it a conspiracy. Now, he would see this as treason against himself because Putin, he thinks that his personality can overcome the geopolitical dynamics of diplomacy, and that's just not going to be the case. But I think it's the things behind this that are the most important. This is on the heels of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's meetings, which have been very successful for Russia, especially, and China, securing major infrastructure and energy deals, 20-plus deals, including the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. What this is going to do is it's going to make Russia much more resilient to any sanctions from the West as it pertains to Ukraine or any pressure from the West globally. And it gives Russia access to the economies of scale and industry that China has, and that's going to make their strategies of attrition in Ukraine actually plausible.
Follow that ripple effect for us then, Scott. What does that mean down the road? If you're talking about Russia having more support and it not coming from the West, what does that mean then going forward for their relationship with the U.S. and the U.S. with the EU?
Yeah, this is exactly what most of the analysts are fearing, and it's a return back to a little bit and even worse from the Cold War, because you see this rapprochement between China and Russia. But look, I don't think that we're looking at a military alliance. I think you're going to see enhanced military cooperation between Russia and China. I think that you're going to see a significant energy movements between the two nations and cooperation. But they both, there's a historic distrust here between Russia and China, and I don't think that either one of them want to surrender any of their own independence of thought from a military scale. So you're not seeing anything right now, or even for my estimation into the future, that can counter NATO's power. However, what you are seeing, and I think India is a classic indicator of this, is that the global South is more willing to speak into these multipolar moments and hold middle ground between the West and the East, especially when you see India's cooperation in the SCO and their announcements of energy deals with Russia. We were expecting perhaps India to shy back from that during this, and we saw the exact opposite. And I think that's an indicator to the West that we're into a much more multipolar moment.
When I saw that photo of the three leaders, I couldn't help but think of the phrase, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Is it a bit of that?
Well, for sure. And this was a lot of the dynamics that went on during the Cold War, as we saw the conflicts, whether they're on the economic level or at the military level, being played out in places that, you know, you wanted to make sure that the powers that be, either the authoritarian regimes or the diplomatic negotiations with democratic regimes, maintain ties with your side. But I think it's going to be much more complex in today's world. China has such an economic hold on many elements of the global economy, and they have the ability to export that very, very quickly. Russia's military, therefore, you know, backs them right up with that. And I think that a lot of the global South, especially when you see the kinds of votes inside of the UN as it pertains to Ukraine, there's an indicator here when we say that more than 2/3 or around 2/3 of the global population either abstained or voted against any condemnation of the invasion of Ukraine. That says something that I think the West has to pay attention to.
All right, I want to go back to President Trump's response. You mentioned it briefly off the top. U.S. President Donald Trump reacting to this parade on social media and the gathering of these leaders. He ended this long tweet by saying, "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un as you conspire against the United States of America." How else can we expect them to respond?
Well, I think that the U.S. is being a little bit flippant with its response. Number one, I think that the appeal to the global South, especially, not seeing this just as an affront to Donald Trump's personality or Donald Trump's regime or the United States writ large, but seeing this as a general appeal to the global South for multipolarity, and especially with India's reaction. I think that the United States needs to take a more comprehensive diplomatic approach to its negotiations and see that any kind of middle ground that they can find with, especially with China and with India, are going to be beneficial to not enticing this into a confrontation. Now, that is going to have to be countered with significant enhancements in military capability and diplomatic capability within the West. And I think that this is where the United States and the EU are going to have their work cut out for them, is appealing to the elements of peace and a return back to those elements of hard power instead of soft power to influence and guide, security, especially in the way that the world is going these days.
Retired Major General and former NORAD Director of Operations Scott Clancy, thanks for joining us this morning. Really great to have your take on it as it just was happening this morning.
Thank you very much.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.